We have 10 seconds before we go live, so please grab a seat. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone joining us here in Oxford at the Blavatnik School of Government. And also a huge welcome to everyone joining us on Zoom. I believe everyone here in the room can hear me okay. I hope all of you joining us on Zoom can also hear us. And hopefully in a moment, we'll also be able to see you on the screens in the room. We have a absolutely packed lecture theatre here at the Blavatnik School. And looking around the room, it's wonderful to see yet again so many of our GoLab friends coming back to the conference. I know many of you haven't missed an edition, and we're really humbled by that. But I also see lots and lots of new faces. And to those of you joining us for the first time, a particularly warm welcome. You're joining an absolutely brilliant community of really intelligent people, really experienced people, but also really friendly, really warm, really open-minded individuals. And for us at the GoLab, it's really genuinely a privilege to be bringing you all together. We've been working really hard for the past few months to put together a really unique experience for all of you. And of course, we started yesterday evening with a traditional spectacular pub quiz, and I was really impressed to see so many of you. Some of you who literally just flown in from Australia, Singapore, Peru, Turkey, and you all made it to the pub quiz. So that's the kind of commitment and dedication we have within this community. And really, it's a privilege for us at the GoLab to really serve you all. If you've looked at the program, and there's a QR code for it on your lanyard, and for those of you on Zoom, I'm sure my colleagues will put on the chat the link to the program. That's your Bible for the next 2 days. All the questions that you have about the conference will be there, I promise you. So please refer to that if you're not sure what room you're meant to be in, what Zoom link you're meant to be in, who's speaking on a particular panel, and so on. So I want to keep my remarks very, very brief. Our Dean, Professor Nairi, has kindly agreed to join us this morning, so she'll give us all a welcome on behalf of the Blavatnik School. And then I'll pass over to Mara, who will introduce our distinguished keynote speaker. And Tina, we're so, so grateful to have you with us. So really, by means of welcome, I just want to express my gratitude to, I suppose, three groups of individuals who've made this conference possible, but also make our work at the GoLab possible. And firstly, I want to express our really deep thanks to the Blavatnik School and to the UK government. Some of you might know the UK government and the Blavatnik School are our founding partners, or almost founding parents in a way. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that vision over 9 years ago. To establish the Government Outcomes Lab. And I'm grateful to them for trusting us and for allowing us to do things differently and allowing us to be more than a center of expertise or a center for research, but really allowing us to be a bridge. And I know we use this metaphor quite a bit at the GoLab, but we really take that very seriously. And the conference is the main bridge that we sort of create every year to create a platform for genuinely meaningful dialogue across different communities, across different disciplines, across individuals that might otherwise not have an opportunity to talk to each other. And I know over coffee, someone was saying, oh, we only meet once a year here at the conference. And that's wonderful. That's why we exist. We also exist, of course, to generate high quality evidence. And we also exist to ask really difficult questions. So be prepared over the next 2 days. We won't shy away from asking those questions. So huge thanks to the school and to the UK government. And then secondly, the conference really wouldn't be possible without the wonderful GoLab team. I know over the last few weeks, so many people have got in touch to say good luck, best wishes. I think most people who know us know that we genuinely put our hearts into the conference. And I can assure that each and every single GoLab has worked so hard over the last few months to make this possible. I say this every year, we're not professional conference organizers, so please, please, please be kind to us, be patient. If we run into any issues with AV, with Zoom, with anything else, we've worked really hard, and quite frankly, over the summer, the wonderful AV team here at the school, they also become part of the GoLab, or rather we take over their team. So I just want to say a huge thanks to Gary, Fred, Alan, Paul, Sam. Behind the scenes, they've been working so hard in preparation for this, and also we're in their hands for the next 2 days, so please be nice to them. I'm gonna ask my GoLab colleagues to briefly stand up just so you see them, so that at the break, if you need help, you can go and talk to them, or you can tell them thank you for putting so much hard work into the conference. So GoLabers, please just stand for a moment. Wonderful. And I should also mention on the next slide, I want to give credit to our GoLab Visiting Fellows of Practice. This is a really distinguished group of individuals who generously give their time and expertise for free to support our mission. And you'll get a chance to meet many of them at the conference over the next 2 days. I know some are joining us online, and really it's a genuine privilege to be working with them. And a huge thank you. I think I spotted Liam. Yeah, thank you. Liam Elsa is also chairing a session, I think, later today. So huge thanks to our visiting fellows of practice. And thirdly, I want to thank each and every single one of you for taking time from your incredibly busy lives to join us here in Oxford, and also for those of you joining us on Zoom. We know it's not easy to be glued to a laptop for hours and hours and hours. And yes, I expect everyone on Zoom to stay on Zoom throughout until 7 p.m. this evening. I'm not kidding. So I know, and I'm really, I have to say, I am really, really humbled, like chatting to people this morning and last night. Like, you really have traveled from really far away to be here today. I know we have delegates from Singapore, from South Africa, India, the US, of course, Costa Rica, Peru as well, Colombia, Sweden, Denmark, Turkey, just so many places. And I'm sorry I haven't mentioned each and every single country. I'm up against time, and I'm actually at time. So all to say, if we jump to, yes, this slide, because we value your time so much, we did put together an absolutely packed agenda. Stay energized, drink lots of coffee if you need to, or tea. We have 2 intense days ahead of us. Obviously, we started very promptly this morning. Over the next 2 days, we'll be together in 25 sessions. Yes, that's a lot. We also have some fun events prepared on the side. So Mara and I and John are leading a run tomorrow morning, 7 a.m., Radcliffe Camera. Don't let us standing there on our own. I hope to see many of you there. And then at 8 a.m. tomorrow morning, we're introducing a new format, because last year, many of you told us we love the conference, we love the discussions, but we want more time just to talk to each other in more informal settings. So that's your opportunity. 8 a.m. tomorrow morning, you'll get croissants and you'll have the chance to collaborate in informal round tables. And on the program, you can see the details of that. Let me pause there. We normally like to also do a little Slido, because we want to know who's in the room. So I suggest we do that incredibly quickly. I do think it's worth it, because over the next 2 days, the interaction with the audience will be vital. So we want to make sure that everyone is familiar with Slido, knows how to use it, and so on. So those of you in the room can just scan the QR codes, and I know my colleagues will put the link to the Slido directly in the chat. And really, we just want to know who we have in the audience, both here and online. And I'm going to ask one of my colleagues to share the screen with Slido, if they can, so we can see the results. Otherwise, if it's not possible, we'll share them over the break. But let's take 1 minute and answer it, I think 3, 4 very quick questions. Oh, that's fantastic. So we always like to know whether it's the first time for someone attending the conference. That's a lovely split, but please take your time to answer if you haven't had the chance to do so yet. And this one is one that we're particularly proud of because we really work really hard to make sure we have a really nice, rich, and as much as possible balance mix of perspectives at the conference. Okay, and then finally we ask, what do you most look forward to? And please be assured we do look at those responses really closely, and those always inform what we do the following year. I'll stop there, and without any further ado, it's my real honor to invite Professor Nairowitz to the podium. Thank you.
Well, good morning to you all, and what a joy to see so many familiar faces and so many new faces at the Social Outcomes Conference. I'm the founding dean of the Blavatnik School of Government, and so a particular welcome to the school. My colleagues and I built and founded this school 14 years ago, wanting to bring the power of this great 900-year-old university to the actual challenges that governments and the partners of governments are facing in real time. So the school was built with an ambition to attract some of the best, most determined, mission-driven, impactful people into public service so that those of you in public service can be joined by them, and those of you who work with the public service can be working with them, and to do the kind of research that's going to help them do better and help those in government do better. And the bottom line of the school is that government is always left dealing with the most difficult problems. If it weren't, human beings wouldn't invent government and try to make it work. The Social Outcomes Conference has become just a wonderful annual convening of the smartest, most thoughtful, dedicated people working on social outcomes and partnerships to achieve social outcomes. And it's been wonderful to watch those of you who are recidivists and those of you who are newcomers building this community out. One of the big themes of the Government Outcomes Lab from its birth has been collaboration. It's been to really try to address three things that governments all over the world find very difficult. One is taking prevention actions. Two is being collaborative with other sectors as well as with other departments in government and other levels of government. And three is innovation, doing things differently. And on these three themes, you'll see so much over the next 2 days. And the very birth of the Government Outcomes Lab, in a way, is an example of those three things. Because the Cabinet Office and the Blavatnik School in its early years came up with this idea of a partnership so that we could combine the practical finger on pulse, eye on the second hand of the clock, which was government, with the deeper eye on the hour hand of the clock, eye on the minute hand sometimes of the clock, deep research and longevity of a university. Governments are whirling faster and faster. The turnover is dramatic. A civil servant pointed out to me that just in the British Cabinet Office, over the last 4 years, there have been 34 different ministers. So that turnover, we like to countervail with so many of you who are researchers, civil society actors who can hold the charge over a longer period of time and help government as they're trying to move rapidly. And then I just wanted very briefly to say that this is such an important time across the world for governments to turn around and do things that they've not had to do for 30 or 40 years in so many countries and places. And that all of those of you who are partners to government are more needed now in those partnerships than ever before. If you think about, not just in this country, but in countries across the world, the ravage of both the global financial crisis, which caused this shrinkage of government investments, and a fracturing of relationships with both the private sector and civil society organizations. And then the compounding of COVID. COVID gave us this moment of extraordinary collaboration and crisis response for a short period. But over the longer term, what we've seen is the compounding effect of COVID and the global financial crisis on investments in health, education, housing, infrastructure. And on top of that, the challenges of climate resilience and the rebuilding of infrastructure across all countries, and the building of green energy and green infrastructure to contain the climate effects of the future. That's a really big ask, where governments are now having to create an ecosystem to make investment in all those sectors work. And as you know, over the last 30 or 40 years, what became the fashion was to treat government simply as the facilitator of market processes, the host of different organizations, the intermediary outsourcing core functions. And the challenge for all those people who are working in government is that that's not working anymore, because the geopolitical circumstances, which have added a huge security dimension, which means that markets on their own aren't going to work, because many of the countries that are doing best are taking a much more proactive governmental role. And because in Europe, in the United Kingdom, in the United States, and elsewhere, the leaders in government are announcing a whole new approach to industrial policy. So governments, civil servants, the politicians, and all those of you who are helping and partnering with governments are at an exciting pivot point where the job is much more ambitious, and it's harder, but it is more ambitious and more rewarding. I would say for several decades, there's never been a time where the role of government and the role of government partnerships with your organizations has never been so important as it is at the moment. And that's why this conference is so important. And its themes of accountability, of transparency, and of trust are so important. The transactional approach that so many governments have taken for 30 years, a transactional approach and incentives, a purely incentives-based approach, it can achieve transactional outcomes. But the magic that humans can achieve when they work together, the magical outcomes can only be achieved when you actually go way beyond transactional partnerships to partnerships of trust. When you can be in a contractual partnership where the contract itself is irrelevant because both sides know that they're committed to the highest quality outcome and have the ability to achieve it, that's when human excellence is achieved. And that's why I think these themes are so important. And to up the game from this rather mediocre transactional approach to this trust-based, at its most ambitious, magical approach, I think is something this room can help all sectoral partners achieve. So thank you to coming to the Blavatnik School. Thank you for embarking on being one of the family of the Social Outcomes Conference. I hope we'll see you in many years to come, but I also hope that this year, as this government and others fashion a new approach that steps up to the plate, you'll all be there helping each other to help them. Thank you very much and have a good conference.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mara Iroldi. I'm the academic co-director at the Government Outcomes Lab with Andrea and my colleague El Carter. We've been here for almost 8 years, and it's great to welcome you back every year. We learn so much. It's a journey that we share together. And today, we are honored to have with us a truly distinguished keynote speaker. And she embodies the GoLab work because she is brilliant academically, but she always works very closely with government. So she really engages with the practice on the ground, which is what makes our conference and our community unique. Tina Nabachi is the Joseph A. Strasser Professor of Public Administration at the Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs at Syracuse University in the United States. She is an award-winning researcher, as I said. She will tell us more of her research and her insight. She distinguished herself in particular for work on citizen participation, collaborative governance, and conflict resolution, all themes that are relevant to the collaborative and partnership work that we've been looking at in the past years and we keep working on. But she has done that, as I said, by working with governments and learning with them. I will stop here because she will tell you all about it in a second. So join me to give her a warm welcome to the podium.
Thank you, Mara. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, good morning. Thank you for that very kind introduction, Mara. I will tell all of you right now that you should just lower your expectations. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be here at the 2024 Social Outcomes Conference. I'm really honored to be here. I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to talk with and learn from all of you over the next few days. I mean, how rare is it to be gathered with so many change makers, with so many people who recognize the need to work together, to pool knowledge and resources, and to generate ideas that inspire the changes we want to see in our communities and our world. I think that is just fabulous, and I'm really looking forward to our time together. But our time together is limited, so I will be direct in my message. We are coming together at a profound moment in human history, one that is rife with political change, with generational shifts, societal upheavals, economic disorder, and climatic chaos. From education to the environment, from human rights to healthcare, from democracy to despotism, it is easier to point to tragedies in social outcomes and public policy than it is to triumphs. It's no exaggeration when the SOC24 organizers say that we are grappling with unprecedented challenges and near constant crises. And I don't think it's hyperbole to say that we are at risk of some of the worst imaginable outcomes. Under these circumstances, under these circumstances, collaboration is no longer optional. It is obligatory. If we are to change the arc of our story and create the proverbial world in which we want to live, then we must collaborate. We must recognize that we are not just interconnected, we are interdependent. We must work across our boundaries, whether those are organizational, jurisdictional, sectoral, or otherwise, to produce outcomes that make the world a better place. So, how do we do that? I don't know. I don't have all the answers. Indeed, no one does. But over the next 2 days, my hope is that we will learn from one another, that we will share our knowledge and our experiences, that we will share our practices, and in doing so, explore how we can build accountability, transparency, and trust in cross-sector partnerships with the ultimate goal of improving social outcomes. To that end, I would like to share some of my insights and offer some foundational principles for collaboration. But first, I want to talk about clocks and clouds and about how we might use that metaphor to rethink and better address our social problems. One of which might be figuring out how technology works. There it goes. In 1966, the great philosopher of science, Karl Popper, divided social problems into 2 categories, clocks and clouds. Do you mind? Next. Sorry about that. Clocks are a mechanical phenomenon. They are regular, orderly, predictable. They are neat and structured. To understand a clock or problems with a clock, you take it apart. You study its components. You measure its pieces. You count the teeth on its gears. Through a process of disassembly, examination, and reassembly, you can fix a clock problem. A clock problem may be challenging, but ultimately it is solvable. Next. Clouds are very different. They're a natural phenomenon. They are irregular, disorderly, and generally unpredictable. They are messy and ever-changing. You cannot take apart a cloud. A cloud does not have constituent pieces. Instead, to understand a cloud, you must study it as a whole, along with all of the factors that created the cloud in the first place: humidity, air pressure, temperature, and so on. The same is true for a cloud problem. You cannot study it in isolation, but rather must study it in relation to all of the factors that directly and indirectly shape the problem. Moreover, you can't fix or control a cloud. Therefore, cloud problems cannot be solved in the traditional sense of the word. They only can be addressed in better and worse ways. Many of our public problems are clock problems. Getting a piece of mail from Oxford to London or to New York or Tokyo, that's a complex challenge. So too is creating a vaccine distribution program or upgrading our water and sewer systems. But we can structure these problems. We can create postal hubs, map transit routes, develop pricing mechanisms. We can look at other health service providing activities, medical distribution programs. We can examine other acquisitions and logistics problems and replicate or alter those processes to fit our needs. We can map current water pipelines and waste processing facilities. We can assess the state of our water and sewerage infrastructure, and we can develop plans for replacement zone by zone. These problems, like other clock problems, are complex, challenging, and sometimes controversial. But they are well defined. They have a clear problem statement. They can be solved with existing techniques and procedures. Authority for addressing the problems is typically in the hands of one or a few actors who have disciplinary knowledge or specialized expertise and who agree on the problem, the relevant knowledge, values, and norms, and the goals for the solution. As we continue to move through the 21st century, however, we are increasingly dealing with cloud problems: climate change, sustainable development, and the transition to green economies, migration, refugees, and human trafficking, poverty, wealth inequality, and unbalanced economic opportunities, the regulation and governance of new and emerging technologies, partisan divides, democratic rollbacks, and the rise of populism and authoritarianism, to name but a few. These are not standalone problems. They are deeply enmeshed and intertwined with others, and like clouds, they affect and are affected by myriad other factors. For example, we cannot address climate change unless we also address transportation, energy, infrastructure systems, water, agriculture, production and manufacturing, and so much more. And these problems need to be attended to not just in Oxford or in the UK, but also in communities and nations around the world. Action must be taken from the hyper-local level to the international level, from the individual level to the societal level, and that action must take place across widely varying political, cultural, religious, economic, and other social systems. Likewise, we cannot understand poverty and wealth inequality, let alone address them, without examining education, healthcare, transportation. We need to address issues around wages, taxation, economic development, and historic and structural racism, prejudice, and discrimination. And to do that, we need to navigate increasingly ideological, polarized, and sometimes dysfunctional political and policy systems. We could spend hours talking about these and other cloud problems, but no matter how much time we spend, we will never be able to break these problems down into tidy little pieces. We will not find gears with teeth that fit neatly together. In part, this is because cloud problems do not have clear problem definitions. How the problem is defined depends on who is asked. There are no existing solutions or standardized techniques for problem solving. Instead, the solution continuously evolves in parallel with a set of interlocking issues and constraints that are themselves continuously evolving. These problems cannot be addressed by a single actor or government agency working alone. Authority and responsibility for addressing cloud problems is dispersed, diffused, and diluted among multiple actors and organizations in the public, private, and civic sectors. And often, addressing these problems requires attitudinal and behavioral changes among the public itself. Moreover, these multiple actors often have conflicting expertise and clashing views of the knowledge, the values, the norms that are relevant, not to mention what the solution ought to be. In short, cloud problems are not only complex, challenging, and controversial, like clock problems, they are also unstructured, intractable, and filled with conflict and uncertainty. So, what are we supposed to do? How do we address cloud problems? I'm not going to answer that question. Instead, I'm going to tell you what we shouldn't do. And one more click. So first, we cannot pretend that cloud problems are clock problems that can be easily structured and solved. While a mechanistic approach is seductive, it is also doomed to fail. The typical response of people and their organizations to cloud problems is to try to make them like clock problems. We try to tame the problem by locking down a problem definition, saying that this problem is just like another problem that has been solved, declaring that only a few possible solutions exist and picking the best one, specifying our measures of success, and then asserting that the problem is solved, or just giving up on trying to get a good solution, putting the problem on the back burner and letting it stew for others to address at a later date. And I'm really not trying to be critical of those who honestly are trying to do good. The effort to transform a cloud problem into a clock problem is a coping mechanism, right? These are steps that minimize uncertainty, reduce complexity, limit the need for search activities, and narrow the range of possible solutions. They are what we all do in our everyday lives to tame the problems we face. This approach works well for clock problems, but it doesn't work for cloud problems. Next. Second, we cannot try to solve cloud problems by using convergent thinking, which uses linear, logical steps to analyze already formulated solutions and select the one that is most likely to be successful. Convergent thinking assumes that there is a correct answer, and in searching for that answer, it ranks solutions over each other. But cloud problems do not have a correct answer, and ranking options may be difficult, if not impossible. Furthermore, convergent thinking pushes us to focus on selecting the best answer, which means that we may fail to evaluate alternatives, that we may devalue subgroup or novel ideas, or otherwise dismiss what are important and valuable options. Finally, we cannot use traditional, expert-driven, or managerialist approaches to address cloud problems. Such approaches simply will not work because cloud problems are not purely scientific and technical. They have social complexity, political complexity, and decision complexity. They involve cognitive uncertainty, strategic uncertainty, and institutional uncertainty. And they implicitly contain competing, conflicting, and socially embedded perspectives, values, and norms. So let me recast what we should not do into what we should do. Click one more. Instead of pretending that cloud problems are clock problems that can be easily structured and solved, we should accept and acknowledge them for what they are: complex, contentious, controversial, and continuously changing. Instead of using only convergent thinking, we should also encourage divergent and emergent thinking. We should couple reason, logic, and precision with inspiration, imagination, and intuition. And instead of using traditional expert-driven managerialist approaches, we should use participatory and collaborative approaches that are ongoing, iterative, and creative, that are dynamic and adaptable, like a cloud. So, Now that I have given you the what, let's talk in more detail about the how. I'd like to offer 10 interconnected principles for addressing cloud problems through collaborative and participatory approaches that build accountability, transparency, and trust. First, adopt a learning strategy. A learning strategy accepts that the problem is messy, that technical methods for problem solving are inadequate, and that the boundaries of the problem are diffuse because the problem is interrelated with others. A learning strategy focuses on knowledge production. In many ways, knowledge is the currency of collaboration and participation. It is the key to building accountability, transparency, and trust, and it is vital for addressing cloud problems. Knowledge must be generated and openly shared by people working together. Contested knowledge requires full consideration, and incomplete knowledge must be balanced and enhanced with new knowledge. In essence, cloud problems require the aggregation, division, separation, and reassembly of data and information, as well as the generation of new shared information. And this leads us to principle number 2. Embrace diverse knowledge and new patterns of knowledge production. A learning strategy accepts that multiple forms of knowledge are necessary to address the problem. Scientific knowledge, technical knowledge, specialized knowledge, political knowledge, cultural knowledge, lay knowledge, and so many others. Moreover, knowledge production requires not only convergent thinking, but also divergent thinking, in which we use problem-solving strategies that deviate from the routine, lateral thinking, in which we re-examine our basic assumptions, perspectives, and directions, and emergent thinking, which happens when we move towards unforeseen possibilities by comparing and combining generated ideas. If we accept that cloud problems require a learning strategy based on diverse knowledge, then we must welcome the participation and input of multiple actors. We must develop processes for engagement and dialogue among a diverse set of stakeholders, politicians and policymakers, scientific, technical, and other experts, activists and educators, philanthropists and investors, and the public, or perhaps better, the many publics. Rather than thinking of these as purely stakeholder processes, perhaps we might think of them as community processes, while also recognizing that community will vary depending on the scale, the level, and the tactics being used to address the problem. My broader point here is that cloud problems require action from all angles, from new policies, plans, and programs at the macro and meso levels, to behavioral and attitudinal changes at the micro levels. And this kind of action requires multiple actors. We also know that these kinds of actions have more support and durability when people have the opportunity to participate in decision making. And this leads to principle number 4. If we want to welcome multiple actors, then we need to encourage multidimensional methods of engagement. We must create parallel and serial learning processes, with some organized by government, others by civic leaders, and still others by everyday people. We need processes focused on inter-organizational collaboration, and others focused on broader public participation. Quite frankly, we need co-creation, co-design, co-production, co-evaluation, co-everything. Cloud problems are multidimensional, and they therefore require multidimensional ways to engage: top down, bottom up, inside out, sideways, upside down. There's no one right way to do this work. Cloud problems do not require either or approaches. They require both and approaches. But if we want the public or the publics to participate meaningfully, and perhaps more importantly, to stay engaged in addressing problems over time, then we need to treat people like adults. We need to give the public the respect, recognition, and responsibility they deserve, rather than taking the paternalistic, patronizing, or placating stance we often find. More specifically, we need to give the public information and choices, a chance to tell their stories, a sense of political legitimacy, opportunities to take action, and participation experiences that are enjoyable, easy and convenient. Doing so will go a long way towards advancing accountability, transparency, and trust. By now, it should be clear that cloud problems are as much about societal and political processes as they are about scientific and technical issues. Accordingly, we must give good process. We need well-designed processes that foster principal engagement so people can cooperatively define and deliberate about issues, discover ideas, and make decisions about moving forward. We need processes that build shared motivation and cultivate trust, understanding, a sense of legitimacy, and a commitment to the effort. And we need to build processes that enhance our joint capacity for action, our ability to achieve a common purpose that we cannot achieve alone. Good process is so underrated, but it is so invaluable to building accountability, transparency, and trust, to enhancing human relations and social interactions, and ultimately to addressing cloud problems. In an effort to give good process, we need to focus on interests, not positions. Positions are what a person or a group wants. They are the demand being made, the solution being offered. Interests are the needs, the values, the concerns, the desires that underlie and motivate positions. For any given issue, people generally have only one position, but multiple interests, with some being stronger than others. But more importantly, people with conflicting positions often share basic underlying interests, which can form the foundation for constructive discussions and productive action. Understanding the difference between positions and interests is central to conflict management, to designing interest-based processes, which are critical for addressing cloud problems. The logic here is very simple. Position-based processes tend to be adversarial. They set up and support conflicting or opposing demands. In contrast, interest-based processes tend to be more cooperative and collaborative because they help people identify and clarify their own needs, concerns, and desires, and better understand the needs, concerns, and desires of others. In doing so, they can build accountability, transparency, and trust, and lay the groundwork for creativity and transformation. But understanding is not enough. We also need to develop theories of change and action strategies. Through good processes, people are likely to identify and acknowledge mutual interests, but they still need to develop mutual goals, shared goals, and they need to agree on the mechanisms for achieving those goals. This can be done through the development of a theory of change, one that articulates the assumptions about what might work to address a problem and what people should do jointly to achieve their goals. As I suggested earlier, however, cloud problems require multidimensional methods of engagement, which are likely to generate multiple theories of change and multiple action strategies. And that's okay, because our theories of change, our action strategies, become tested over time and will lead to new cycles of inquiry. They are at the heart of a learning strategy. Principle number 9, reframe failure as a learning opportunity, or as my best friend says, embrace the suck. Through the process of testing our theories of change and our action strategies, we will discover what works, what does not work, and what can be improved. Not everything is going to lead to success, but just because we don't have success isn't necessarily bad. It simply means that we need to adapt. We need to face the consequences of our theories and our actions with our eyes wide open, regardless of whether those outcomes are delightful or disappointing. But more importantly, we need to understand that just because something does not work does not mean we have failed. It simply means that we have learned something and that we get to try again. And this brings us to the final principle: nurture creativity, innovation, and experimentation. Each of these 10 principles speaks to the need for us to do things differently And doing things differently means that we must be open to creative expressions, innovative ideas, and experimental activities. These are the tools for generating breakthroughs on cloud problems. These are the mechanisms that enable us to move toward addressing cloud problems in substantive and meaningful ways. These are the tools of progress. They also are the tools that bring to life the 9 other principles in this list. Now, many of you are probably thinking, this Nabachi lady is some kind of Pollyanna, right? A naive dreamer, excessively enthusiastic, overly optimistic. Well, I'll take it. Right? I have been called far worse. I will say in my defense that I am idealistic, but I'm not naive. I believe we must have a vision for our future. We must have a vision of the outcomes we seek. Otherwise, how will we know if we're on the right path? As I said at the outset, collaboration is no longer optional. It is obligatory. And it is not easy, but it works. I have seen these principles not only build accountability, trust, and transparency, but I've seen them help us improve our social outcomes and, frankly, make the world a better place. From the relocation of a native Alaska village that was literally sinking due to climate change, to the rethinking of the Greater Toronto metropolitan area, from efforts to improve community-military relations in Arizona, to the redesign of prisoner reentry programs in Finland, and from fundamental shifts from managing groundwater in Mexico to efforts to save tigers in India, macaw in Pakistan, and elephants in Thailand, people come together. They collaborate and participate in processes that help to make meaningful, positive changes in the world. And all of you here implicitly understand the difference between clock problems and cloud problems. And all of you, know it or not, recognize these principles in action. And if you don't, I believe that you will come to recognize them over the next 2 days because they are unreservedly embraced in the work that is being done here and the work that you will hear about at SOC24. So, whether you are working on human rights or health, environmental protection or education, youth engagement or elder care, whether you are a public servant, a civic leader, a scholar, a business leader, a social entrepreneur, you are here because you believe in the connections we share and the need to use our powers for good. Like you, I know that change does not happen in one fell swoop, one single action. It happens over time, incrementally, as the result of people working consciously, concertedly, and collaboratively to build accountability, transparency, and trust, and ultimately to improve our social outcomes. And like you, I believe we all have a responsibility to try to make things better, to build the mosaic of solutions that leave our world more beautiful, more graceful, and more kind than it was left to us. Thank you all so much. I look forward to spending time with you over the next 2 days. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Tina. I couldn't have asked for a better introduction. I asked Tina to kick us off at the Social Outcome Conference by helping us putting the effort we put in and day out on a big canvas of ideas. So when I asked her, I said, like, imagine this is a Nobel Prize winning speech. Like, it's really, think back, big ideas. We don't want to know the last of your papers. We really want to know what are the big themes and what is at heart of what brings you to work in the morning. And so thank you for sharing so generously your insight. I have time for a couple of questions. I'm asking my panelists to take seats because you are going to hear more ideas and more reflection on Tina's. But we have about 10 minutes to take questions from the audience. I have John with a microphone. So I'll take Arushi, can you introduce briefly who you are? John is bringing you a microphone. And my team, if you have interesting question online, please post your question and I will turn to Huli and Eve who will read the questions. Make me a sign if you feel strongly that we need to table a question. Arushi.
Hi, frame. What is a cloud problem? What is a cloud problem and what is a cloud problem? I'm Arushi Thurbe from NORAG, team lead for private sector approaches. And of course, when interacting with education policy, you're constantly dealing with the technical problems versus the more social problems. And something I have been grappling with is the role of experts with experience in solving cloud problems, right? They all know where the boundaries are of the cloud and the cloud problems, but often their experience.
Arushi, do you want to try this one? I think this one's working.
Often their experience keeps getting dismissed by the bigger cloud problem people on, no, you only know the technical stuff. So what are some practices to actually engage in reflective learning with them and really take advantage of the knowledge that they do have?
That's a great question. And it's so interesting because usually I hear the opposite, that the experts are with the clock knowledge, the technical knowledge, are dominating the process, and they're ignoring kind of the broader social connection. So that's really interesting that you're experiencing that way. Look, we definitely have these tensions in our society between, I would say, the kind of bigger thinkers and the technical thinkers. And we need that technical expertise. One idea that I didn't build into this talk because I thought it was too complicated to explain in my short period of time was how, when it comes to implementation of our solutions, I think that's when we can really start to go back to our clock problem thinking, right? That's when we need experts. Once we figure out what the tools are, for example, to address some environmental problem, we want to go back to our experts who will help us figure out how we reduce the particles in the air, right? Or how do we measure this particular structure? But that translational piece is missing, right? And there's some really interesting work being done right now to think about how do we translate what I would say are the scientific, the kind of technical expertise into something that's broader and more manageable. I know that's not really a great answer for your question, but I hope it starts to think about how we can really embrace that kind of knowledge and think about embedding it in others.
Thank you, Tina. I have many questions. Maybe I'll take 3 very quickly, and then we'll try to answer them if we have time. In the front here.
True fact.
Delivering that to the citizens, the other interests that are political are very little time for learning, very little capacity around process. And so what I love everything you say is how can I implement this within a kind of 18 months with very little resources and a lot of much more political interest than policy interest.
I'll take straight away a question at the back as well. No, I'm taking somebody at the back. And I think you will need to hold your question for the discussion at the end.
So, thank you. Thank you you very much. My name is Graham Randalls. Company is called Envexo. Again, I really enjoyed the presentation, and the messages were fantastic. I'm just wondering to what extent you feel that our organizations and our institutions are structured around clock problems, and whether that's something that also needs to be addressed.
Thank you. Quickly, last question, because you are smiling so nicely. Can we have a microphone quickly? And then you have a few minutes. I know you will whiz through.
Yeah. Is anyone doing a really good job of governing cloud problem kind of implementation? Like, has anyone nailed governance and accountability around those issues?
Okay, so I'll start with the one in the back because I feel like that one is right up my alley. You're right. Our institutions and our structures are, our organizations are structured around clock problems. We are structured very much in a 20th century way of thinking, right? 20th century was so much about addressing clock problems. And we need some transformation, right? We need to transform those organizations and institutions. That happens through leadership, it happens through time, it happens through the concerted effort of multiple people working together. To your point around change management, I would say, yes, there are assholes in the world. This is, hashtag true fact. That's my 21st century technology knowledge. But I would say that people really do care about solutions. And sometimes the best efforts happen in spite of leadership, right? So it's not just the leader at the top of the ministries or agencies that changes with political turmoil or changes with the political winds that matter. I am one of the 4 people on the planet that will say they love bureaucracy, right? I love public servants because they come to the table with the majority of them, certainly not all of them, but with a genuine public service motivation, with a desire to do things differently. And so I would say tap into those folks. Tap into your career civil servants, your career public servants. Tap into the people who have the innovation ideas, who are driving things forward. In the US, the Partnership for Public Service just released its list of people nominated for the Sammys, which are awards for public servants who did creative, innovative, wonderful changes. And those are the people that I think we need to be building collaborations around. The governing implementation, where did that one come from? Yeah, some examples of that. I could think of lots of individual case studies where you can see this happens. But one place where it is happening on scale, at scale, I should say, and we're still trying to figure out whether that's like the degree of success that we're seeing there, is in the state of Oregon in the United States. So there, beginning in the 1990s, the governor started mandating the use of collaboration in several policy fields, and then created structures within the state government to support collaborative efforts. So for example, the state has 79 government-mandated watershed collaboratives that are diffused across the state, each managing a different watershed. And then they created a state agency to help advance the individual efforts of those collaborative governance regimes and enhance the collective efforts of all of them. And this work is now happening in 5 policy areas: health, education, public safety, natural resources, and economic development. And we're seeing a lot of measuring outcomes. This is what I'd love to learn from all of you, is how do we start thinking about measuring these outcomes at scale across geographies and locations, rather than looking at single case studies and kind of, anecdotal evidence. This is a struggle that I'm having right now. But we are seeing real advancements in things, and even areas where in economic development, for example, it's hard. How do you measure that, right? Number of jobs created, number of industrial sites prepared. But what's interesting is that during COVID, the economic development collaboratives, which were really set up to promote economic development, they became the governor's resource for managing COVID in this crisis, because those economic development councils had created networks across the community. So they became completely irrelevant to their work. I mean, these are not public health guys and ladies. These are not public health people, they are not pandemic people, but they became the hubs in which pandemic needs were met. Because they had created this collaborative infrastructure. And I'd be happy to talk to you more about the work happening in Oregon, if anybody's interested.
Thank you so much, Tina. I'll invite you to take a seat. Don't go far, because at the end we'll come to Q&A and we might find more questions to you. I mentioned that Tina is an expert researcher, brings academia and also practice. And now we have a panel that brings together academics and practitioners, engaged academics and thoughtful practitioners. And I also forgot to say that it's true that academia and practice makes our community, but also being fun with. And clearly Tina is somebody who is fun to be with, and our panelists as well. So take advantage over the course of the conference to enjoy their company. I asked them, we don't have much time with them, but they all bring so much insights. I'm abusing their patience to be here today, because I asked them to reflect on Tina's keynote and then share with us a gem. They don't have much time, but go to them and hear more. They don't have the time to do justice to their work. But I'll start with Mario. Mario is a professor of management and sustainability at the Politecnico in Milan. He's the founder of a research center that is looking at impact innovations. And he's both, as I said, a distinguished scholar and a practitioner. He's one of the apolitical, most influential academics in government, as is Elle. He's good company, like I bring a big thinker here. And he had several positions as an advisor in government in Italy, the G7, the G8, the EU. So it's really, he can bring many, many insights to this work. But I asked him to reflect a little bit on this role of the change maker and trying to tackle this complex problem. Being at the Politecnico, he works with technology innovators. Often innovation is a technological quest. And so I asked him, what is your reflection? How does it work? Making innovation for complex problem. What is your experience, Mario?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me here. And of course, Tina's speech was really inspiring. Thank you. And the first time I discussed it with Tina, it reminded me of a very famous sentence from a pretty famous evolutionary economist, Richard Nelson. And the exceptional team here was so flexible to retrieve the picture and share it with you in minutes. And the sentence was, if we can land a man on the moon, why can't we solve the problems of the ghetto? That was 1974, 5 years after moon landing. And so it is the 50th anniversary, and the question is still there. We haven't an answer yet. And the answer probably is, well, yes, we have a clock problem, that is landing a man on the moon, and a very cloud, if you allow me, problem that is the ghetto as a metaphor of social problems, of course. And I will start from my political experience as a senior advisor to the minister when we were dealing basically with industrial policy, technology and innovation policies. And as an advisor to the Ministry of Research and Innovation. And basically, when a problem is a clock problem, it is a legitimation for policymakers, policy officers, civil servants, public servants to implement simple, linear, mechanical policies, right? This is a very good excuse. And the illusion is that the problem is a clock. We can use simple action consequence mechanism to implement the policy and make things happen. True or not, this is the thing. But the natural experiment was that the government asked us to, it was the beginning of the new sustainability awareness, so sometimes around 2014, 2015. And they asked us to introduce a so-called social element in technological innovation. and innovation. So ask companies not only to develop innovations and to invest in research, but to do so with the intent to find good solutions to social problems and also to minimize unintended consequences of innovation and technology. The moment we had to change a little bit to shift to this different perspective, we realized that the portfolio of policies that we have had until now, until then, was basically useless. Because immediately the problem became a cloud problem, right? When you introduce the social dimension and you put technology and innovation in a bigger context, immediately the problem becomes a cloud problem. So we changed, and basically what our attempt was to turn upside down the agency logic that the government was working with. And so no more call for proposal, projects, evaluation of the project, funding of the project, or the technology. That was the typical clock-inspired policy attitude. But it was, you need to form coalitions that were called clusters at the time. The coalition need to have certain characteristics. And your task, we're not giving money. Your task is just to propose and design a proper governance in terms of inclusion, in terms of diversity of interest, or basically some of the principles that you have been telling us about. And so what was approved was the governance ex ante and the measurement infrastructure that was used to legitimate the action they were going to take. After that, there was full delegation to decide which project or which actions to undertake. And they were more or less automatically approved. So it was a complete turnaround from top-down policies to bottom-up policies. And the focus of government selection was the quality of governance, the quality of cooperation, and the quality of measurements, rather than the quality of the project. It worked decently, a lot of problems. One problem is certainly worth discussing in this context, and it was the public servants or civil servants' resistance to this new problem, because we ran into a paradox. And the paradox, in my view, was that the more a problem is a cloud problem, the more civil servant will try to reduce it to a clock problem. And this is not because they are not up to the task, they're not good enough. It is because the clock problem is the only one, the nature of the clock problem is the only nature that is compatible to the accountability rules they are subject to. And of course, the legal responsibility, the things that they could held responsible for. So this is fully understandable. And my point is that if we, in certain countries, I say South Europe, but more in general, I should say, all the countries where the legal system is inspired by the Roman legal approach and not the common law, let's say, where there is a huge prevalence of forms over substance, it is very difficult to have accountability rules that are compatible to cloud problems. And so the learning process, the trial and error process, the error is a huge problem for civil servants under the Roman law. And that is, of course, something that is very difficult. So the approach we took was, so how can we reassure these guys that they will not take them out their accountability space? How can we create a space where they really can experiment new policies to handle cloud problems? We were not naming them cloud problems. If we had known you before, it would have The narrative would have been much simpler. But how can we do that? I think that we need here a top-down approach where we need to set certain rules in terms of quality of the governance. We should say if the governance is a quality governance, meaning that it is inclusive, it's cooperative, it is diverse, it is open, all the things that we know. And of course, if we can, the key point is the measurement infrastructure or the measurement approach. Not in terms of quality of the measurement techniques themselves. This is not the issue, right? We are very good at measuring things. The real issue is the governance of measurement that is made of two pillars: data integrity and third-party independency. If we can build an impact infrastructure that is built on these two principles, I think that we can create a space for a new generation of policies that is more useful for cloud problems. Because the bitter truth is that every problem is a cloud problem. What we discovered in this experience, and it is going to be my last remark, what we discovered is that technology is not a cloud problem. It is a cloud problem. Because the moment you start considering the unintended consequences of technology in terms of social problems that it may cause, exclusion and everything, immediately technology becomes a massive cloud problem. If we, again, take experiences like Airbnb, Uber, any food delivery platform, there you have a very pure and good and healthy social intent, sharing economy, a beautiful thing, the pure DNA of social innovation. When this pure DNA of social innovation meets technology, immediately it drifts away towards the worst version of monopolistic capitalism, as it happened to Airbnb, for example. You had this beautiful example, and now Airbnb is kicking out all major European capital cities because it is creating social problems. So the point is, the conclusion is, not even technology is a cloud problem.
Thank you. Good luck to us. Thank you so much, Mario. You are under the spotlight, Russell, now. I'll bring Russell in, and then I'll pause for one or two questions if you come from the audience. Andrea?
I just want to make sure we don't forget about our Zoom audience who've been sharing responses. Everyone really loved
Yes.
Professor Livachi's keynote, so we'll have some questions.
I'll come to you to pick a question at the end of Russell's intervention. So Russell is a senior public leader. So you are putting him on the spotlight. You are the person under these accountability constraints and with the difficult to deal with cloud problems because you're set up to work with clocks and errors are unforgivable. And so you bring experience from local government in the UK, but I think the experience of government is universal, and also the national healthcare system. And Russell has also a perspective of having been at the front line earlier in his career, so it's a very rich perspective. And I would love to hear how it resonates. Like you are at the core of these, like you need to solve these cloud problems. Good luck. But you don't have the instruments. How do you manage? Have you seen areas of innovation that happens in government? And what are the key tensions that you deal with, and how do you cope with them?
So first of all, just to say thank you, Tina and colleagues. I think it's been a really inspiring and interesting morning so far. And I think a lot of what you talked about with the accountability framework there really resonated. So I think there's a couple of different bits to that. So partly it's to do with the kind of managerial aspect of that. So, how do you progress or otherwise in your career and sort of the developmental bits. But the other bit I think is really important to acknowledge is the political interface and the media one. So public services to varying degrees are accountable to politicians, whether that's local councillors or at national level. And of course, politicians are accountable both to the voters but also to the media. And I think I find the idea about human learning systems very compelling. And I think there's lots of recognition in the kind of policy world about the complexity of public services and the need for new responses. So, and a recognition that some of the new public management type approach that has characterized the last 30 years, so target setting and that sort of business, isn't really an adequate response. Can you hear me now? Okay. I'll try and speak up for now. And
while we speak.
Teamwork. Can you hear me now? Okay. I'm just gonna project.
Yeah, the people on Zoom. You want to stand on the podium?
Stuart, try this one.
Oh, wow. Thank you, John.
See, collaboration in action. But yeah, I suppose what I would say is, there's the political interface, which, and I think at the moment there's a gap between kind of the policy wonk world, where there's a recognition of complexity and the need for new responses like human learning systems, and then sort of how does that interface with the real world, where actually the media is more interested in a kind of old-fashioned scandal. And I guess the other context, of course, is diminishing resources. And as Neri talked about, public services operate at the most complex parts of society. So, if you look at child protection, for example, clearly there are lots of things that can go wrong in that sort of realm. Even with the best intention, even with the best practice, it's a cloud problem. And sort of how do we create space for public servants to do that work in a way that isn't punitive and encourages the learning? With that said, I suppose there's two positives, because I feel like I focused there on some of the constraints. I think politicians can also be very supportive and useful at driving new ways of being. So, you talked about the kind of multi-modes of engagement and the need for co-production and all that sort of thing. There are some really ambitious, and sort of I come from local government in the UK, so that's where I'm most familiar with, but there are some really ambitious councils doing really genuinely different participatory budgeting, citizens' assemblies, which actually is really sort of co-producing problems or potential solutions in a different way with communities. So, and that is often driven by the political leaders who are really committed to serving their residents. And I suppose the other bit is bureaucracy. So I'm also a bit of a bureaucracy geek, but I think it's how do we if the problem is that the scandal is, public servants don't have a grip and this, that, and the other, how do you make some of the things like human learning systems into some of our more bureaucratic frameworks? I think Elle will talk a little bit later about formal relational contracting, which I think has some really exciting potential there. And I'll hand over at that point, I think.
Thank you so much, Russell. It's really refreshing to hear the perspective on the ground and see that there is innovation and appetite, even from politicians, maybe local politicians, in contrast with the 18 months central government that turnover maybe don't have time to do this. So great. I'll come to Andrea. You said you want to pick a couple of interesting questions from our online audience.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you everyone on Zoom. I hope you can all hear me. So there's a question from Helen Jones. She left a lovely comment underscoring the importance of engaging with diverse, marginalized communities. And she says, if we don't prioritize inviting marginalized groups into our cloud problem discussions, then we won't hear those few that manage to arrive somehow over the noise of everyone else. So how do we best do this? So I suppose primarily a question for Professor Nebachi, but something for the panelists to reflect on as well. Thank you.
Do you want me to address that now?
And then I'll ask Russell for a reflection as well.
Absolutely. I think this is one of the most difficult pieces of collaboration and participation, is not just getting participation broadly. I mean, and when we do that, it's hard enough to get the usual suspects in participatory processes. It's much harder to engage groups that are in vulnerable circumstances or who have been historically marginalized. I think there are some technical things that we can do with the design of our participatory processes and the way we reach out to those communities, but ultimately it boils down to trust, right? And it boils down to taking the time, making the commitment, and building those relationships, right? That enables them, not just enables them, it's not about creating enabling structures, that makes people feel welcome, makes them feel invited, makes them feel like if they actually put the time and energy into this, they will have political legitimacy, that their voice will matter. So I think this goes back to that principle of treat people like adults.
Thank you, Tina. Russell, what is your experience?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I suppose what I also think is there are no quick fixes, and relationships take time. So, and actually, you know, you can't underestimate the amount of mistrust as well that often exists with some of our many communities. But I think, you know, there are some really positive examples. And again, I think COVID actually provided a catalyst for some really deep reflection about what some of those mistrust and inequalities were, but also to do something interesting and different. So in South London, we've done a program called South London Listens, which has involved sort of taking a community organizing approach and working with our communities. And initially sort of it was focused about mental health, but actually what that illuminated was, again, the kind of cloud problem issues. And the result of that has been a number of NHS organizations and others actually doing things like committing to improving wages for sort of communities, doing kind of adult education things for communities, which again wouldn't be in their typical remit, but has been a really powerful result of doing some deep engagement with people we wouldn't ordinarily talk to, I think it's fair to say.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I want to remind you that there are a number of session deep dives through the conference on empowering voices and local approaches, where there has been an attempt to more participation and diversity. So make sure you look at the program and go there if this is your main passion. I'll move on, and my next speaker is Elle Carter, who is the academic co-director with me here at the Government Outcomes Lab. She's also the UKRI Future Leaders Fellow, which is a very prestigious fellowship given to the most brilliant academic in the universe. She was named among the apolitical 100 most influential academics in government, like Mario. As I said, we promise you big minds here. Her research focuses on how you create collaboration and coordination in complex public service delivery, and in particular on cross-sector partnership. She leads an amazing executive education module on leading cross-sector partnerships. You might want to look into that as well. And at the moment, her research is exploring the role of contracting and how you can manage to deal on some of this tension to make space for a more open and flexible approach, putting together trust and accountability in the same contract. What is your research and experience so far?
Thank you. And thank you so much, Tina, for giving us this really refreshing motif and for giving us the license to treat cloud problems as cloud problems. I want to take some of that motif and think about linking it much more to the core of the GoLab's work and the core, I think, of many of our conference attendees who are working on outcomes-focused cross-sector partnerships. So that's what I'm hoping to do. My sense is that this clock metaphor maps very neatly onto government's typical approach for striking and structuring contracts with partners outside of government. We run procurement processes, develop contracts in a very formal, formulaic, and often mechanical process. And much of this public contracting aligns with principal agent theory, and we sort of assume that we can get to a complete, specified, formal contract. We're assuming that our partnerships are for clock issues. Indeed, you can think of a complete contract as a clockmaker's manual. We're specifying down to the spring, down to the cog, who is responsible for each element and how they ought to be assembled. But so much of the work that people in this room are doing does not fit with that kind of clock type problem. And so across the 2 days we have together, I know we will be hearing from people like Amel and others at the Education Outcomes Fund who were very much responding to cloud type issues in terms of tackling the education crisis and thinking about poor quality early childhood care and education. We have others I know who are working in fragile contexts. So we'll be hearing about a project that aspires to improve water quality and sanitation in Haiti. And I know very well from Life Chances Fund projects in the UK that the challenges that are being tackled are so socially embedded. They have all of these cloudy qualities that you describe. The Chances Project, for example, is supporting young people who have disengaged from school training. And that is so socially and politically rooted that we cannot unpack it as a clock issue. And so we hit frustrations when we've got this dissonance between our kind of cloud responsive partnerships and a very kind of clock-oriented contracting lens often. And I think that's some of the catharsis that we hope to get through together in this conference. So why is this so hard? And you touched on it, Tina. It's hard because this is complex. Perhaps there's a desire for innovation, but we can't specify at the start what all of this looks like. So we can't set it out in a contract. There might be very many different facets or things that we need to innovate with and experiment with along the way. And certainly contexts are changeable for all of the partners and all of the problems we're working on here. So when these needs change, how can a static and fixed contract support that need for responsiveness? So these conventional contracts are clearly failing as containers for our cloud-focused partnerships. Relationality, I think, is a theme that's coming through much more strongly in our research and in this community's work, bringing about a more collaborative and responsive approach. There seems to be a congruence, and Russ, you were touching on this, between sort of the diffuse and messy and the relational. But I think a reliance on the relational can also raise concerns for due process and accountability in the way that the public sector spends money, concerns for the potential corruptibility of personal relationships. And I think we were hearing about this question of governance. So I think there's a seed of a question for you, Tina, around how to hold to account for action on cloud problems. And so I just want to speak a little bit about this concept of formal relational contracting that we've begun to experiment with. It's a sort of a new arrangement that brings mutual goals and governance structures into a formal contract. So we're trying to foster trust and cooperation, build a foundation for keeping interests aligned over time. But I guess it's neither wholly formal nor wholly relational. We're trying to get the best of both, the accountability of a formal contract with the adaptability of relational working. And we're working on a book that builds on these themes. And David Friedlinger has some great material on this. And Mario, actually, I think it's this point that you were getting at about the quality of governance and measurement, and how can we bring that into our partnerships to give us a bit of structure. So David talks about this partnership mentality that needs to be based on principles of trust, autonomy. That can be something that we put on the page. So it's a form of contract where both the formal and the relational terms of the contract can be spelled out, but might also both fall into breach. So we actually hold one another to account for the quality of relationships as much as the hard terms of the contract. And we'll see across our time together some really concrete examples of the clauses that might enable some of this real keen commitment to principled ways of working together. I've got a quote from a contract that we've been analysing. God, this is nerdy, but I think it can give us a scaffold for some of this. So a commitment on all appropriate levels based on openness and trust in transparent information sharing data environments. So we've got this really explicit commitment to honest data sharing across all the partners in this project, and that point around actively growing knowledge together that can permeate across boundaries seems to be very important. So I think I just wanted to raise a kind of potential danger that I think has bubbled through some of this, which is that sometimes with outcomes-based contracting, we're tempted to frame cloud problems as clock issues. We're tempted to bound to specify the cog and the spring and the tick, tick, tick of outcome metrics. But what we're also seeing is outcomes as aspirational, galvanizing a collective force. And that seems much more congruent with the concept of clouds. So measuring outcomes not as a punitive or disciplinary exercise, but a model of active learning, permeability across organizational boundaries. So I hope that it's some of this formal relational outcomes-based partnership that might kind of ride this tension more fruitfully, helping us to acknowledge clouds as clouds and balance that kind of accountability with responsiveness. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Elle. There will be a couple of sessions throughout the conference specifically focused on relational contracting for those who are interested. And there is also a big picture session today on rebuilding trust in government, because this trust seems to be like an important ingredient that you need to have, and how do you nurture and how do you cultivate it. I'll come to our last speaker for this session, Chi-Hung Sin. Chi-Hung Sin is an independent consultant. He's a senior advisor to many governments in the UK, Japan, Singapore, Hong Kong, Abu Dhabi, but also to international organizations like WHO and UNICEF, who are dealing with cloud problems in very different political environment, legal frameworks, and they go to Chi-Hung Sin for his ability to find a way through and structure. He has a lot of expertise on outcome-based approach as a way that maybe create this space to allow the flexibility, but also the trust cannot be taken for granted in all political environments. So Chi-Hung, what is your reflection? You have seen cloud problems addressed in very, very many different political environments. What is your gem for our audience?
So first off, I'm not here because I'm a big mind. I'm here because of loud colors. So that's why you like putting me here. And second, you would have noticed I'm not Neveline. Neveline was supposed to be here, but her flight was canceled yesterday. So I was parachuted in at last minute. So I'm just still forming my thoughts. So don't hold it against me. I think let me start off with two general observations first before going into maybe more specific interventions. So the two general observations I have are, when you look at governments, what are our expectations for government in terms of these relationships, these structures, these contracting mechanisms? Are we in danger of expecting government to be a bit of everything to everyone? So we say we want to move away from the transactional, we want to embrace the relational, we want it to be more flexible, but not too flexible. We want it to be able to, be more risk-taking, but not too risk-taking, please. So, what are we actually asking of these organizations? And is it actually their responsibility solely to respond to that, right? Because when you look at regulatory regimes across the world and how we manage risk, there are so many different approaches, ranging from very controlling to very empowering regimes. But at the heart of it is this question of, I think, Russell, you touched upon this, regulatory regimes don't just emerge out of the pure objective indicators and metrics. They respond to public opinion, they respond to the media, they respond to the market. So it's forever shifting. And governments are in place, the bureaucracy is in place because it needs to do certain things like fiduciary duties, transparency, accountability, and protection. When you look at how we regulate and legislate and run our services, we still do not have a social model of risk, right? We don't have a collective model of risk. In the absence of that, how can you expect one party, in this instance a government, to therefore fly the flag for absolutely everything? It's not their sole responsibility, so to speak. The second observation about these sorts of methodologies, approaches, I always wonder, it's about, is it the end point or a starting point or somewhere in between? And what do I mean by that? Are we more, predisposed to end up with things like relational contracting or, the more clout ways of working because we already have good relationships with some of these people? So that's a logical endpoint to those sets of relationships, in which case I'll ask the question of, do we then need them to be a relational contract? And actually, do things like relational contracts give it a sense of legal authority in legitimizing some sets of relationships that were already predisposed to be good outside of this context that may have emerged in different circumstances? And then if it's a starting point, getting these structures of governance and contracting mechanisms, if it's a starting point for building certain types of relationships, then as Tina, you mentioned, and, Elle, you talked about, things like contracts can only do so much. There's a whole suite of things we need to look at. And you've both talked about governance. Governance is so important in making this real. But we often think that, we've got a governance structure, we've got a governance committee. It brings together all these stakeholders. That means collaboration. It does not. And it certainly does not actively build trust. The structures don't lead to certain outcomes. Behaviors lead to certain outcomes. So those are the two general observations. Don't get me wrong, I'm a huge fan of the relational. Those of you who know me know that I don't stop talking about the importance of relational work, which leads me to perhaps more specific interventions here. Is I'm so conscious that this conference just gets increasingly international every year. And sometimes I'd like us to problematize the orthodoxies we work within, sometimes quite unconsciously, because sometimes we are in danger of saying things like, this must be apparent to everyone, that this is a good thing and this is how you do it and this is why you should do it. And I always think that these sorts of relationship issues are so infused with certain assumptions that come from cultures, religions, geographies, political cultures that need to be unpacked. So I work a lot with Middle Eastern countries and Asian countries, and they come towards these kinds of outcomes-based mechanisms quite often from a very different perspective. So they're not looking at engaging in these mechanisms from, say, the Anglo-American perspective of, some kind of market reform of public services, public sector. No, they're coming to these mechanisms as a way of shoring up the center. And actually, the different parties in the ecosystem coalesce around the center. And when I speak to colleagues in the Middle East, they're always bemused that we spend hours talking about relational contracting. They just think it doesn't make sense. Those kinds of structures and relationships in their ecosystems pre-exist and have legs beyond the specific contracting or project structures. And just because you have a relational contract doesn't in any way challenge those orthodoxies and these institutionalized norms of these bigger worlds that they inhabit. So they find these kinds of conversations quite funny, and quite like an intellectual endeavor. And the last intervention is that similar to the point about encouraging us to kind of always disrupt these orthodoxies we work within and problematize that. Shameless plug, I'm chairing the Disrupting the Narrative deep dive tomorrow afternoon, okay? So more of that later. But the last intervention there is, we are also making assumptions, not just of why people engage in these sorts of things, why do they come to the table, but what do they want to get out of it, out of doing these things. And again, we think of, these outcomes-based instruments and approaches, like in the UK, we've often written about, we're approaching it because we want efficiency, even the dream of fiscal savings, or well-being, or collaboration, or innovation. In some contexts, like in some Latin American contexts, in some African like in South Africa, that I think Neveline was going to speak to, the South African context. And certainly in South Asia, there are stakeholders using these instruments to root out corruption and fraud. in that context, don't talk relational to them. They need the contract to be a contract because that accountability, transparency, evidence is what they need to drive down some of these problems. So these are still outcomes-based contracts with outcomes for beneficiary groups, but the system level angle as to what else they are looking for these projects to do is quite different. We would never have necessarily imagined, oh, UK doing one of these contracts to drive down corruption. But it can be quite a prevalent purpose. I always remember Abba Torat-Shah. Abba, are you in the room?
No,
Abba,
she's
no?
traveling. She's
Okay. So I always remember having a conversation with Abba Torat-Shah, who used to be at the British Asian Trust, involved in the Educate Girls, development impact bonds, etc. And she, I was just astounded to learn from her. But I've seen since read a UNESCO report saying exactly the same thing, that in India, the skills sector, the vocational provider, skills provider sector is riddled with fraud. And so they were using these sorts of instruments to actually clean up the slate and really use that accountability mechanism. So talking about relational contracting, that in that kind of context seems quite misplaced and unrealistic. And just finally to end off with, loved your keynote, Tina, and I love clouds because that, unlike Mario, that made you think about Robert Nelson, it made me think of Joni Mitchell and her seminal second album, Clouds, with one of my favorite songs, Both Sides Now. And, it just makes you marvel at clouds. Looking at clouds, it's a metaphor for life's ambiguities and mysteries. And I think it's those ambiguities and mysteries that drive my work. I've said in a previous conference, I dance on the edge of chaos, and I do. That we work and live in complex systems that sometimes feel chaotic, but I think to dance on the edge of chaos is that defiance, that beauty, that creativity. So I encourage you all to dance on the edge of chaos.
Thank you. I'm going to privilege the audience online because we will benefit from our speaker here. And I will first take a couple of questions from the online audience, and I let Andrea.
Thank you, Mara. And we actually have Ashley McCall lined up to unmute herself and ask a question. Ashley, I hope you can hear me. Feel free to unmute yourself, put your camera on if you'd like to. Wonderful, I can see you on the screen. So take it away.
Hi everyone. My question was really on the relational contracting issue. I wondered, we paid almost no attention to the relational aspects of our contracting, and I think that then contributed to some real difficulty at a later stage in the work that we did with our commissioner. Are there any examples of really high quality relational contracts which have got which talk about things like behaviours that we could see or share or look at or review?
Thank you, Ashley. I think this is for you, Elle. Can I take the second question already? So we prepare our speaker to respond.
I think we can take one from the audience.
Here in the front.
Thanks. My name's Trevor Rees. I'm from ENSO Impact. It's a question about differentiating between authority and leadership, which I think in some ways is analogous to this differentiation between adaptive and technical or clouds and clock problems. And sometimes people treat cloud problems as if they're clock problems and vice versa. So the question to the panel is, how do you recognize this when people have framed the problem incorrectly, and how can you get them to reframe it?
Thank you. Elle?
Thank you. Thank you for that question. So we do have a number of examples where these relational elements have been very intentionally developed and embedded in the contracts and the partnerships. So the Kirklees Better Outcomes Partnership is a great example, and we can extract clauses from that contract. They're going in a very nerdy technical annex to the book that we're working on. A number of these clauses that have actually been taken to court and interpreted as a foundation for a relational contract, and that the contract needs to be interpreted in that light. but we would love to see more. So if you have done the work to develop these kind of relational practices and embed that in your way of working, either very formally on the page in terms of the clauses of the contract, or in terms of guiding principles that suffuse the way that you work, please do feel able to share those, because that's the kind of resource that I think we can host on our website and share much more broadly, because I think we're all sort of learning how to embody and enact this, both in practice and on the page. So it'd be good to see more examples as well.
Mario, I'm putting you on the spot on this very difficult question on reframing.
No, first of all, let me say I strongly agree, and I think it is a very good point, the differentiation between authority and leadership. Because probably when we seriously deal with cloud problems, we will need more leadership, less authority, because authority then brings in principal agent schemes and everything. So yes, I think this is a very good point. How to recognize, very difficult. I had an illusion a few years ago that there was a sort of test to be taken that was get a civil servant to write Article 0 of their idea or of their contract. Article 0 is make explicit the causality relationship between your actions and what's happening next. So if they are able to write Article 0, it is a clock problem. If, as in most cases, they are unable or reluctant to write Article 0, it is a cloud problem.
Thank you.
Very practical.
You want to add something very quickly? And because I'm standing between you and the coffee break. And so I would like then to pass on to a last, like a 30-second takeaway from our panelists.
A 30-second takeaway?
Okay, so I'll go there.
Okay.
Because catch up with them, talk to each other. The aim of the keynote is really to kick off the conference and see how valuable it is to hear this different perspective and how much we have to learn from each other. I gave our panelists a homework, like finish the sentence, and I asked them to give us a final message, and that is, I wish that the discussion over these 2 conference days will enable participants to
see and embrace all of the learning that we can have with one another over the next 2 days.
Thank you, Mario.
To act a new form of political radicalism, that is get civil servants, make civil servants at ease with cloud problems, and have a chat with law schools. Because I think law schools are the elephant in the room here.
Somebody feels call under pressure. Russell?
I hope it helps people to look at clouds from both sides now and learn to journey virtual.
Elle?
Very good. To re-energize and have the new connections to confidently embrace those cloud-like issues.
And to me, it's to get people to feel that we're part of a movement, because we are. Because sometimes it just feels so lonely doing this work in ecosystems and structures that don't understand. So stand up, be counted, join up, and have fun.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much again, Tina, to give us a great start. We break for coffee at the moment. There is a feedback form somewhere. There will be a slide. Let us know what worked well in this session. As Andrea said, we worked really hard and we want to know what has worked, but also how we can improve. We really read this feedback and improve year on year because of it.
We also appreciate positive feedback.
Yeah, so especially that. And after the break at 11:30, there will be 3 sessions. One is on education, one is on climate, and one is on health, talking of clouds. So pick your clouds for the 11:30 and check on the program and enjoy your discussion and your cloudiness. Sì,
Yeah.